December 7th, 1941, 8:30 hours. The sky over Oahu, Hawaii, was black with smoke. The USS Arizona was burning. The USS Oklahoma had capsized. The water of Pearl Harbor was a toxic soup of oil, fire, and bodies. But 150 miles to the west, on the tiny, privately owned island of Niihau, the sky was perfectly blue. Niihau was known as the Forbidden Island. It had no electricity, no telephones, no paved roads. It was inhabited by 136 native Hawaiians who lived exactly as their ancestors did. They fished, they farmed, and they spoke a dialect of Hawaiian that was dying out everywhere else. They didn't know about Hitler. They didn't know about the chaos happening in Pearl Harbor at that very second. They were living in the 19th century. But the 20th century was hurtling towards them at 300 miles per hour. Airman First Class Shigenori Nishikaichi, an elite pilot of the Imperial Japanese Navy, was in trouble. He was flying an A6M-20 fighter, tailcode B11-120. He had just participated in the second wave of the attack on Pearl Harbor. His guns were hot. His adrenaline was spiking. But his fuel tank was pierced. A .50 caliber bullet from an American P-40 had punched through the aluminum skin of his fuselage. Nishikaichi looked at his gauges. Fuel pressure dropping. Oil temperature rising. He couldn't make it back to the aircraft carrier Hiryu. He had been briefed on emergency procedures. If you can't make it to the carrier, go to Niihau. The intelligence report said the island was uninhabited. A safe rock to wait for a rescue submarine. The intelligence was wrong. The island wasn't empty, and it wasn't safe. Nishikaichi's engine sputtered. The propeller began to windmilling. He was falling out of the sky, a metal dragon descending into the Garden of Eden. The crash. 9 o'clock hours. Hawila Kiliohano, a Hawaiian sheep rancher, was walking his morning patrol. He was a big man, broad shoulders, hands calloused from decades of hard labor. He heard a sound he had never heard before. A mechanical scream. He looked up. The Zero fighter clipped the tops of the kiawe trees, shredding branches. It slammed into a fence line, tore through the wire, and plowed into the red dirt of a pasture. Dirt and metal flew into the air. The landing gear sheared off. The plane skidded for 50 yards on its belly before coming to a violent stop, nose down in the earth. Steam hissed from the shattered engine block. Kiliohano didn't run away. He ran toward the crash. He didn't know it was a Japanese plane. He didn't know they were at war. He just saw a man in trouble. He reached the cockpit. Nishikaichi was dazed. He was fumbling with his harness. But his first instinct wasn't gratitude. It was duty. He reached for his Nambu pistol in his holster. Kiliohano saw the movement. He saw the gun. The Hawaiian didn't ask questions. He reached into the cockpit with a massive hand, grabbed the pistol, and ripped it away from the pilot. Then he grabbed the pilot by the collar and dragged him out of the wreckage like a sack of rice. Nishikaichi screamed in Japanese, tried to reach back into the plane. He wasn't trying to get the gun. He was trying to get the maps. The cockpit was filled with top-secret documents, codes, attack plans, radio frequencies. Kiliohano, sensing the pilot's desperation, shoved him aside. He reached in and grabbed the leather map case. No. Nishikaichi lunged. Kiliohano stiff-armed him. You sit down, the Hawaiian said in his native tongue. In that split second, the power dynamic was set. The elite pilot of the Emperor was now the prisoner of a sheep farmer. But the pilot wasn't defeated. He was just calculating. The false peace. The other islanders arrived. They saw the plane. They saw the red circles on the wings. But remember, no radio. No phones. They didn't know that Pearl Harbor was burning 150 miles away. They didn't know that these red circles meant death. They treated Nishikaichi with the ancient Hawaiian code of aloha, hospitality. They gave him water. They bandaged his head. They set up a luau, a feast, in his honor. Imagine the scene. A Japanese pilot who had just dropped bombs on Americans, sitting in a village circle, eating poi and fish, surrounded by smiling locals who were playing ukuleles. But Nishikaichi wasn't smiling. He was scanning the faces. He needed an ally. He needed someone who spoke Japanese. He found them. Yoshio and Irene Harada. They were Japanese Americans living on the island. They were the only ones who could understand him. Nishikaichi whispered to them while the Hawaiians sang. Japan has attacked, he told them. The American fleet is destroyed. By tonight, this island will belong to the emperor. He lied about the conquest, but he told the truth about the attack. The Haradas faced a choice. They were American citizens. They lived in Hawaii. But looking at this pilot, hearing about the might of the Imperial Navy, they felt the pull of blood. They looked at the ignorant, happy Hawaiians around them, and they made their decision. They didn't translate the pilot's words to the locals. They nodded. They decided to help him. They decided to commit treason. The signal. That night, the islanders lit a bonfire. But they didn't know that on the horizon, the glow of Pearl Harbor was faintly visible against the clouds. Nishikaichi stayed in the Harada's house. He told them, I need my papers. I need my codes. If the Americans get them, they will break our cipher. Kilioheno, the big Hawaiian, had locked the papers away in his house. He didn't trust the pilot. He had seen the gun. He had seen the aggression. Nishikaichi made a plan. It wasn't a plan for escape. It was a plan for domination. He told Harada, we have the gun from the plane. The 7.7mm machine guns. We have the pistol. These people have nothing but fish spears and old shotguns. We can take the island. Think about the audacity. One pilot and 2 traitors planning to conquer an American island. They waited for the news to reach the locals. They knew that eventually, a boat would come from Kauai with the news of the war. And when that happened, the hospitality would end. They had to strike first. They had to turn the island into a fortress for the emperor. December 11th, 1941. For days, the islanders waited for the weekly supply boat from Kauai. It never came. The U.S. Navy had shut down all boat traffic. Suspicion grew. Why was the boat missing? Why was the Japanese pilot whispering with the Haradas? Then, someone fixed an old battery-operated radio. The village gathered around it. Through the static, they heard the voice of the announcer from Honolulu. Pearl Harbor is in ruins. Thousands dead. Japan has declared war. The islanders looked at Nishikaichi. The guest wasn't a friend. He was the spearhead of an invasion force. But Nishikaichi was faster. He knew the timeline. He nodded to Yoshio Harada. Harada went into his storeroom and came out with a shotgun and a revolver. Nobody moves. Harada screamed. The Imperial Navy is coming. The betrayal was complete. A neighbor had turned a gun on his friends. Nishikaichi ran back to the Crash Zero. He didn't want to fly it. He wanted its teeth. He unbolted the 7.7mm Type 97 machine guns from the nose of the plane. He draped ammo belts over his flight suit. He walked back into the village looking like a Terminator. A pilot armed with weapons designed to shoot down planes, now pointed at women and children. They took the village. They herded the natives into a group. Nishikaichi was frantic. He didn't care about the people. He cared about the papers. Where is Kilioheno? He screamed. Where are my maps? Kilioheno, the sheep rancher who had snatched the papers, was hiding in the outhouse. He saw the pilot coming with the machine gun. Kilioheno realized he was the target. If he gave up the papers, the pilot could radio the Japanese fleet if he fixed the plane's radio and guide an attack on the island. Or worse, the codes would remain unbroken by the U.S. Kilioheno made a split-second decision. He didn't surrender. He ran. He burst out of the outhouse and sprinted toward the jungle. Harada fired the shotgun. Boom! The buckshot missed, shredding a palm tree. Find him, Nishikaichi ordered. Burn everything until we find him. They started with Kilioheno's house. They doused it with kerosene and threw a torch. The dry wood caught fire instantly. The flames leaped into the sky, visible for miles across the ocean. The first battle of World War II on American soil wasn't fought by armies. It was an arson attack on a family home. Kilioheno was big, but he moved quietly. He had the papers tucked inside his shirt. He reached the beach. He pushed a heavy whaleboat into the surf. He had to get to the island of Kauai, 17 miles away, to warn the main islands. It was a race. Behind him, the village was burning. Nishikaichi and Harada were taking hostages, Ben Kanahele and his wife, Ella. They put a shotgun to Ben's head. We know you know where Hano went, Harada shouted. Tell us, or we execute you. Ben Kanahele was a gentle giant, a sheep herder. He stood 6 feet tall, solid muscle. He looked at the small pilot. He looked at the traitor Harada. He spoke in Hawaiian to his wife. They're going to kill us anyway. We have to fight. The pilot understood the tone, if not the words. Nishikachi raised the pistol, which he had recovered. You want to die? The pilot asked. No, Ben said, stepping forward. I want to finish this. The fight didn't start with a punch. It started with a gunshot. Ben leaned. Nishikachi pulled the trigger. Bang! The bullet hit Ben in the stomach. Most men would fall. A gut shot is agonizing. Ben didn't fall. He grunted, like he had been hit by a stubborn sheep. He kept coming. Nishikachi panicked. He fired again. Bang! The bullet hit Ben in the groin. Ben stumbled, but the adrenaline and the sheer size of the man kept him upright. He fired a third time. Bang! The bullet hit Ben in the leg. 3 bullets. Stomach, groin, leg. Ben Kanahele looked down at his wounds. Then he looked at the pilot. The pilot's eyes went wide. He realized he wasn't fighting a man. He was fighting a force of nature. Ben roared. It was the sound of an island's rage. He reached out with hands that could crush coconuts and grabbed the pilot by the throat and the leg. Ben Kanahele was bleeding from the stomach, groin, and leg. He was losing strength. He knew he had only seconds before he collapsed. He didn't try to wrestle the gun away. He grabbed the pilot, Nishikachi, by the collar and the ankle. Ben lifted the Japanese airman high into the air. Nishikachi screamed, flailing his legs, realizing he was helpless against this giant. With a roar of pure rage, Ben swung the pilot like a rag doll. He smashed him head first into a stone wall. Crack! The sound of the skull hitting the lava rock was sickening. The pilot went limp instantly. But the fight wasn't over. Ben dropped the pilot and fell to his knees. His wife, Ella Kanahele, seeing her husband shot, grabbed a large rock from the ground. She ran to the pilot. She didn't check if he was breathing. She brought the rock down on his head. Again and again. It was primal justice. The invader who had terrorized their island was destroyed by the very land he tried to conquer. Yoshio Harada, the traitor, watched the scene unfold. He held the shotgun, but his hand was shaking. He saw the pilot, the symbol of imperial power, lying dead with his skull crushed. He saw Ben Kanahele, bleeding but alive, looking at him with eyes full of judgment. Harada realized his mistake. He had bet on the wrong side. The Imperial Navy wasn't coming to save him. The Americans were coming, and when they arrived, he would be hanged for treason. Harada looked at Ben. He looked at the shotgun. He didn't fire at the Hawaiians. He turned the barrel toward his own stomach. Boom! The traitor fell beside the pilot. The invasion of Niihau was over. It lasted 1 week and ended in a pool of blood on a sheep pasture. Prompt for Part 10. The next day, the boat from Kauai finally arrived. It carried a squad of U.S. soldiers armed with rifles. They expected to fight a Japanese invasion force. Instead, they found a bonfire, 2 dead bodies, and a wounded hero. Ben Kanahele was taken to a hospital on Kauai. Doctors were amazed he survived 3 bullet wounds at point-blank range. The story became a sensation. The government needed a victory after the humiliation of Pearl Harbor. Ben was awarded the Purple Heart and the Medal for Merit. He was celebrated as the one-man army. But while Ben was a hero, the incident had a much darker consequence for thousands of others. The Niihau Incident reached the desk of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The Navy intelligence report highlighted one terrifying fact. Yoshio Harada, an American citizen, had turned traitor within hours to help a Japanese pilot. This confirmed the worst fears of the military. They argued, if Harada turned, any Japanese American could turn. It was a lie, a generalization, but in the panic of 1942, it was accepted as truth. 2 months later, FDR signed Executive Order 9066. 120,000 Japanese Americans, men, women, and children who had nothing to do with the war, were rounded up and thrown into internment camps like Manzanar. The betrayal on Niihau was the spark that burned the civil rights of thousands. The incident proves how one small event on a tiny island can change the course of history for an entire nation. Kanahele saved his island, but the fear caused by his fight destroyed the lives of innocent people. If this story of heroism and tragedy opened your eyes, hit that like button. Subscribe. We tell the history they don't teach in school.